Okay, everyone, we're going to get started now, so people will carry on joining, I'm sure. Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming. It's great to see you all in the online virtual world. Glad that we still got some great support for the society going. I'm going to start off with some announcements. So I'm going to go over to Ryan, who's going to talk about tomorrow's Lit Talk. So that is with Mary Lou McDonald, the president of Sinn Féin. So Ryan, do you want to say a few things?
So I put out a video the other day asking for questions, and I've had quite a few through already. If anyone else has a question they want to ask Mary Lou, either they can join and ask it themselves or get Thomas Copeland to ask it on their behalf. Please send it either to the Facebook page, the Litterific Facebook page, or send it to me personally on Facebook, either of those, and we can get your question put to her.
Great, thank you very much. And also tonight we are announcing our great debates. So this is our series of debates that involve major figures involved in shaping our society. So tonight we're announcing our first great debate, which will take place on Monday at 6 p.m. That event will be going up after tonight's debate, and that great debate is "This House Regrets the Decriminalisation of Abortion in Northern Ireland." And Ryan, would you like to introduce some of the guests we have for that debate?
So on the proposition for the debate is Anne Widdecombe, the former Conservative MP and Brexit Party MEP, Peadar Tóibín, the leader of On2, and Carla Lockhart, the DUP MP. On the opposition is Ella Whelan, who's a columnist for Spiked Online and the author of What Women Want, and Anya Grugan, the Belfast City Councillor for the Green Party. And there is one other speaker that we've yet to confirm, but will get confirmed before Monday. And we also have student speakers on both sides of the debate. So for the proposition, we have Ben Cavan and Mark Gilmore, and for the opposition, we have Jodie Morrow and the return of the legend himself, Mr. Conor McArdle. So on Monday, we have the first great debate, which is "This House Regrets the Decriminalisation of Abortion in Northern Ireland." It will be online, as everything is these days, and we would appreciate any of you joining to take part in the debate.
Yep, so that's some absolute great news that we've got. The council has worked really hard on that, and especially Ryan and Thomas Copeland has also helped to support the council in securing these guests. So we're really happy with that. More information will be put on our Facebook page and our Twitter. That will all be launched after tonight's debate. If you wish to ask a question to the speakers, I think that will all be done for a stream. So you'll be able to comment on the stream, I presume, and we will get questions. I'm
going to try and get questions pre-submitted so that we can, it's just because it's harder to work it online.
Yeah.
In a normal
So we have some of these debates scheduled for later on in the year. So let's hope that as soon as we can get back to being in person, that we can have some great events, great debates, and also our Lit Talks. So that is Friday with Mary Lou McDonald, the president of Sinn Féin, and also on Monday with our great debate with some amazing speakers and also student speakers as well, and that'll be all posted online. So thanks everyone. So that's all from me on the front of announcements, I think. So it's time to turn, as always, to Mr. Matthew Sullivan to deliver the minutes.
Thank you. On the 5th of November 2020, the Queen's University Belfast Literary and Scientific Society convened for the 7th ordinary meeting of its 172nd session for the motion "This House believes sex work is not real work." As usual, the meeting began with announcements from President Matt Lee, followed by the reading of the minutes, followed by private members' business. Emily Monroe brought up the US presidential election, which had occurred the previous Tuesday, asking the House their views on Trump's idea that he should be able to decide when votes stop being counted. Responses were heard from Jamie Warren and Amy Doherty. Mark Gilmore asked who the House believed would actually win the election, saying that his own belief was that the scales were tipping more towards Trump. Emily Monroe disagreed, saying that she believed it would probably be Biden, though it could go either way. Jamie Warren brought up Meghan Markle's privacy case against the Mail on Sunday, asking the House's thoughts on her and Harry's split from the royal family. Responses were heard from Ryan Hoey and Pedro Leone. After President's questions, the meeting moved to the vote of prior opinion, and with 9 votes for the proposition, 16 votes for the opposition, and 4 abstentions, it seemed the House did, in fact, not believe that sex work was not real work. Speaking first for the proposition was Bunny like the rabbit Chandran. She began by pointing out that sex work is a very broad term, encompassing any form of sexual conduct that generates an income. She stated that while the proposition believed that prostitution was hard work, they believed it would be harmful to call it real work. She gave examples of the issues prostitutes face even in countries where the practice is decriminalized or legalized. She further argued that very few people who go into sex work do so because they actually want to do sex work, and that trying to legitimize the practice by calling it real work was just another failure in the long string of failures of the state that led to people having to become sex workers. Speaking first for the opposition was Jack McAfee. In his maiden speech, he began by defining work as any activity requiring mental or physical effort to achieve a result, and that therefore even somebody just masturbating on camera for OnlyFans was, by definition, real work. He argued that using one's body for work is part of any physical job, from a factory worker to a retail worker, and asked why sex work specifically is considered bad when there are so many jobs which require using one's body, and so many jobs which exist solely for the pleasure of others. Speaking second for the proposition was Amy Doherty. In her maiden speech, she began by stating that the proposition was not advocating for the criminalization of prostitutes, but were instead advocating for the Nordic model of criminalizing the solicitation of a prostitute, thereby criminalizing those who exploit prostitutes rather than the prostitutes themselves. She argued that prostitution is not a calculated and voluntary choice, saying that most were coerced or exploited into it by others, that it was primarily women from disadvantaged backgrounds. She asked if prostitution was a free choice, then why is it that it's the most vulnerable women who are doing it? She concluded by saying that both men and women were being exploited by this industry, that it was not empowering, that it was not legitimate work, and urged the House to vote for the proposition. Speaking second for the opposition was Cleo O'Donovan. In her maiden speech, she began by claiming that the benefits of legalization and regulation of sex work were far greater than the downsides. She tackled the subject of sex trafficking, saying that regulation could end this practice. She argued that the criminalization of solicitation of prostitutes simply drives the practice underground, making it impossible for sex workers themselves to obtain justice when abused by their clients. She stated that sex work had always been around, and that it always would be, concluding that we had an opportunity now to examine and improve the conditions of sex workers. Speaking third for the proposition was Ben Cavan. He claimed that the opposition had painted a pretty but ultimately false picture of sex work. He made the point that while contract killing and drug dealing required physical and mental labor, they could hardly be considered real or legitimate work. He railed against the idea that the industry could be improved by regulation, speaking about the pornography industry, drawing a link between a rise in domestic violence and a rise in the consumption of pornography in the UK in recent years. He argued that the abuse women face in the pornography industry meant that it could not be considered legitimate work and therefore could not be considered real work. Speaking further for the opposition was Shannon Paler. She attacked the claim that prostitution cannot be considered legitimate because of the dangers involved, pointing out that many other perfectly legitimate jobs, such as policing, are dangerous. She argued that sex work exists regardless of whether it is labeled as such, giving the example of the Netherlands, where the number of prostitutes actually dropped after legalization. She argued that legalization and regulation had a host of benefits for sex workers, giving them workers' rights, access to the courts, pensions, and welfare benefits. She also argued for the economic benefits of legalization, pointing out that sex workers in the UK right now could be paying tax. Speaking forth for the proposition was Perry Delkick, on behalf of her sister Layla, who unfortunately could not attend the debate. In her maiden speech, she began by rejecting the term sex work, saying it was a euphemism which minimized the exploitation of victims, referring to it instead as paid rape. She argued that the presence of money was a form of coercion, making any paid sexual contact rape. She brought up the case of a woman being raped by a client after trying to revoke their consent, showing that this inability to revoke consent also precluded true informed consent. She argued that for the majority of prostitutes, it could not be a choice, because for them it was the choice between being a prostitute or starving. She further argued that even if all prostitutes were the small proportion who enter the industry voluntarily, any legalization allowing for the sale and trade of human bodies in the marketplace was equivalent to chattel slavery. Speaking forth for the opposition and concluding the debate was Chloe Devine. In her maiden speech, she asked why the legitimacy of sex work was even in question. She argued that that reason was stigma, giving examples of many other harms that the stigma against sex workers creates, arguing further that legalization would help to end this stigma. She attacked slut-shaming and terminology such as selling yourself, stating that while it was ridiculous that people believed that performing sex work makes these women lesser or victims, she argued further against the notion that sex workers must be victims, saying that a sex worker is no more a victim than a factory worker, stating that they must be considered separately from those who are trafficked or sweatshop workers who are victims of abuse. She concluded with the quote, "He that is without sin among you, let him first cast a stone at her." Questions were heard from Ryan Hoey, James Orchin, Pedro Leone, Tara Chisholm, Jamie Warren, and Mark Gilmore. Finally, the vote of speakerability was held with 13 votes for the proposition, 17 votes for the opposition, and 3 abstentions, meaning that the motion, "This House believes sex work is not real work," was not carried. May I take the minutes as read? I will take that as a yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. So now, before we start with private members' business and President's questions, we have one motion that needs to be brought to the House. So that is that Councillor Seamus Defiche has accepted the Council's invitation to become a member of the Literific Trust. So this has to go to a full meeting of the House. So I propose the motion that the House would ratify Seamus Defiche's appointment to the Literific Trust. So this is Councillor.
But what is the trust?
But what is the trust? The trust is a body that guides the council and future members of the Literific, keeping everything Literific going in the future. They're a source for us in guidance for how to run the society financially and also how to hold events, etc. We've got people that are involved in many walks of life that support the society, and Councillor Seamus Defiche has been a good friend of the society for quite a while. So if anyone wishes to speak on this, I will let anyone speak on it. If anyone wishes to speak on it. No? Okay, so I propose the motion that this House would ratify Seamus Defiche's appointment to the Literific Trust. So all those in favour, could you raise your hand now? Okay, brilliant. Mr. Secretary, do you have a number for that?
Yep, 18.
Okay, brilliant. And all those against, could you raise your hands now? Okay, Mr. Secretary, do you have the numbers for that?
Yep, looks like could be 2, could be 0, who knows?
And could all those who wish to abstain on the motion raise your hands now? Okay, that's how many abstentions is that, Mr. Secretary?
3.
Okay.
That's 18 ayes, 1 nay, and 3 abstentions. So
Brilliant.
almost unanimous.
Almost unanimous. Thank you very much. So I'll inform Councillor Seamus Defiche of his appointment to our trust. So that's brilliant. Okay, so now that's done with. We now move to private members' business. This is the part of the night where you can raise any business of your own, anything that you've seen in the news, anything you think's interesting to gauge the House's opinion on. So do we have anyone who wishes to raise any pieces of private members' business? Please raise your hand now. Grant Warren, take it away.
Yeah, so having seen that Joe Biden has been confirmed as the president-elect of the United States, although some people still continue to dispute that, and saying that it looks like the Democrats are likely to either have a tie in the House or lose the Senate. Sorry. Do we think that? How much do we actually realistically think that a Biden administration will be able to achieve?
So this is how much will the incoming Biden administration be able to achieve? Ben McCarran.
Yeah. Can you hear me, by the way? Hello.
Yeah.
Oh, you can hear me? Okay,
Yes.
Fran. Yeah, so I think I saw it looks like the House of Representatives is going to go to the Democrats, although they have a pretty slim majority, and the Senate, I think, is going to go to the Republicans, which very slim majority there as well. People are saying like majority of one to the Republicans. So I think they could achieve a lot of stuff that has sort of cross-party consensus. I know they wanted to like expand Obamacare. That was one of their big sort of policies. I think they could probably do that because there's a couple, I think like 2 Republican senators who have said they're in favor of it, and then if they have the House, I think it should be fairly easy to achieve that. There's more things, however, that are probably more contentious that they've talked about, like the Green New Deal. I'd be very sort of wary of that being passed at all, to be honest, just because the Republicans are so like vehemently opposed to it, and with a Republican Senate, it just it wouldn't really happen. But look, time will tell. I think I don't think Joe Biden's actually got that many solid policy sort of proposals really compared to other Democratic candidates from the primaries. But I think at least Obamacare, I'm fairly certain after thinking about it for the past couple of weeks that that should be able to happen within the Biden administration.
Thank you for that, Ben. James Orchin.
I think the point that just has to be made at the start is that Biden is the first president since Richard Nixon to come into office without holding a majority, potentially in the Senate, and he's nearly lost the House. I think that is hardly a sort of step by which the Democrats can enact their supposedly radical agenda. I think really, like all this talk about a blue wave, in the end, turned out to be nothing more than a little puddle at best. The Democrats really, in this election, I think, went in saying they're going to do far too much, and this terrified many Republican voters who were on the fence. I mean, I read an interesting report that in the midterms last time, these suburban Republicans wanted to punish Trump, but he wasn't on the ballot, so they punished the Republican. This time around, he was on the ballot, and they could keep in their local Republican congressman or senator. So really, I think perfectly it's the Democrats' fault. I really see this. They went in far too cocky, saying there's going to be a blue wave, and well, they're probably not getting anything done, and they're probably going to lose the House in 2 years' time.
Thank you, James. Kira Swell.
Yeah, essentially, I'm going to echo some of the points that were made here. Essentially, the Democrats hoped that because of some of the mistakes that Donald Trump has made for his presidency, that there would be this massive blue wave, as people basically expected that that he would get less of the vote. But however, this is not the case, and the problem is with the current the Democrat president is basically the fact that a lot of Americans hate his guts. America is so divided right now that I don't think he would get massive support for anything he did here, because there are still die-hard Trump supporters out there that will basically critique any single thing he does. And there's still people who are Republicans that are supporting Trump because he receives so much of the vote. So it is a massive problem going forward.
Thank you. Emily Monroe.
Yeah, I definitely agree with a lot of what has already been said. I feel like even though the Democrats won the White House, this election has all in all been quite embarrassing for them, really. I mean, they lost what had been a fairly strong majority in the House. The Senate doesn't look like it could go any better. But in terms of the Democrats being able to get any of their agenda through the Senate, I think one quite interesting character that we have to sort of remember is Mitt Romney, who has been known to sort of step away from the party line at times and side with the Democrats on some issues. So I'm intrigued to see what he does and what role he could potentially play in a very close Senate. But then going back to what was said originally when this piece of private members' business was raised about Biden's victory perhaps being disputed specifically by the Trump campaign, this led to honestly what has been my favorite moment of the entire election, which is the Four Seasons debacle, wherein the Trump campaign, I think, tried to book the Four Seasons Hotel, but ended up booking some random landscaping firm to have their big press conference at. So essentially, all the Trump campaign lawyers brought the press to basically like the backyard of some small random shop in the middle of nowhere, to sort of, I guess, end the Trump campaign for good in a way. I don't know. There could be something symbolic in there if you want to read into it. I just thought it was funny.
Yes, and you can also purchase a T-shirt from the Four Seasons agricultural company, which says "Lawn and Order" because they've made some money out of it. So it's nice that a small business was being supported, I suppose, from that. Mr. Olkin McSparrow.
Hey all. So I think one of the things that we are forgetting is that Joe Biden was vice president, and Joe Biden is the dead center of the Democrat Party. Pretty much, if you want someone to go and talk to Republicans, listen to their concerns, and then come up with a reasonable middle ground compromise in American politics, Joe Biden was your go-to guy. So in a way, the Republicans having control of the Senate, just having a Supreme Court justice in, if they were going to be working with any Democrat, Joe Biden is the sort of ideal person for America to actually possibly get some meaningful change through the Senate right now, and as well as that, actually stop a further Republican president, because he is a very middle of the road character. The blue wave was undoubtedly over-exaggerated, but one thing that is going to have to be looked in at was that Trump's past 4 years have been a disaster, for want of a better phrase, but we have seen that Trump got 3 million more votes than he did last time, and that the Trump brand of politics is very popular still. And even if he doesn't win in 2024, like he says he's going to run again, we've maybe had the first populist right-wing politician, but we could very easily have in 10 years' time a new populist right-wing politician who's a lot more competent than Donald Trump ever was.
Thank you. Mr. Luke Holmes.
All right, so I think I share a lot of the sentiment with what's been said already about the legislative chambers. It looks like it's just going to be a very slow and frustrating 2 years, to say the least. So, but additionally, I'd just like to add Biden's first day or first week plan with his executive orders looks to be something I'm a bit optimistic about. It looks like he's prioritizing stuff like an actual coronavirus task force, rejoining the Paris Agreement, and just putting other policies like racial gender equality at the front of it. So it might be something to look forward to. Who knows?
Thank you. And now we turn to Eternal President and Sun God, Matthew Bradley.
Thank you very much for that introduction. It's great to be back. I think what Emily brought up about the Four Seasons is very important to consider as a metaphor. And I am saying this as an English student, but it was not just they booked the wrong place. It was not just that they booked the car park of the wrong place. They booked somewhere next to a sex shop, and across the road was a funeral home. If that isn't a metaphor, being in between a sex shop and a funeral home, I don't know what is. But I think it speaks to something that's kind of like, it's funny, but that's just where we are now. I think Trump's legacy won't be in policy. It won't be in anything else. It won't even be in the memes of the presidency. It'll be the fact that the rhetoric he has used over the past 4 years and the way he has conducted himself, once that is done, that's it legitimized. And as has been brought up before, there will be another Trump. And even if it's another Trump on the Democrat side, the next 4 years, really, it sounds harsh, they don't really matter. They're probably going to be distinctly okay, unless something appalling happens. What we're looking at is what are the actual repercussions of this presidency, because whether you like him or not, oh no, I don't need to be neutral. I hate him. The repercussions of the way he has acted and the way he has put his own spin on the presidency will percolate down, and it could be in 4 years, could be in 40, but we will see people of the similar ilk. So yeah, they're going to have trouble.
Thank you, Matthew. Now we turn to Umar Ziam.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would just like to highlight something that Alkin had said previously. While Joe Biden is the single highest vote winner, and fair play to him, in the United States electoral history, the second largest vote winner in United States electoral history is Donald Trump. And Donald Trump came in on a wave of anger, resentment, by loads of American, mainly working class and white people. And if that anger and resentment isn't dealt with, isn't reconciled, isn't addressed by this current president and future Democratic presidents, yes, I do agree with Mr. Bradley that another angry wave and another Donald Trump is going to come back.
Thank you for that, Umar. And for the final word on this, we'll go to James Orchin, the collector of everything which is a fun fact.
I just have to make a point on what Umar had just said there. I really don't get why this is a fact that's been trotted about on Twitter that, well, Trump won the most votes for a Republican in history. Well, the same fact is, yes, George Washington got 28,000 votes in 1792. 100% of the votes. It doesn't tell you anything. I don't know. Well, Trump got about 70 million. He still didn't win. It doesn't matter how many votes. It's in comparison to the other candidate. So I really don't see why that is being trotted out as an actual fact when it's really just, yeah, he got a lot of votes, but the other guy got more votes than him.
Okay, well, I was going to end it there, but I saw two hands shoot up and a very confused-looking Olkin McSparron is now on my screen, so I'll let Olkin have a response there before we end this piece.
James, how the hell do you know off the cuff the amount of votes that George Washington got in 1792? That's...
I have a Wikipedia tab open up on another part of the computer here.
Right, thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. So we're going to move, if anyone else has another piece of private members' business to discuss that they wish to bring up. Anyone else have a different piece of private members' business? Michael Kozinski?
Yes, I'm Brian Hoey's friend. I'm from across the pond, as you can hopefully tell, I would assume. So just a few thoughts. First, your pronunciation of my Polish last name was flawless. Most Americans can't get that right, so thank you. Secondly, I'm actually an American in Pennsylvania, so one of the states that actually mattered in this presidential election. And I have to say, it's been really fucking stupid this past week in the States, because for the past few months, President Trump has been saying, don't use mail-in ballots, don't use those, they're susceptible to fraud and everything. And then when his supporters go to the polls in person, and then as he watches his vote count dwindle as more mail-in ballots are counted, it's been fucking stupid watching him have this surprised Pikachu face and then claim fraud was involved. No shit, dude. You actively discouraged your supporters from using mail-in ballots. What the fuck did you think was going to happen?
Thank you. I'll forgive you for some of the language there, because you're obviously an American, and
yeah.
You're not used to our customs here. So I did bang the gavel, but I realised my microphone was on mute, so that wasn't very, very helpful. But thank you for that, and welcome to everything weird and wonderful about the Literific. So thanks for joining us.
Yes, thanks for having me.
A very interesting comment there. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay, so does anyone have any pieces of private members' business which are not concerned with Joe Biden and the United States election? Going one. Oh, we have something from, it won't let me show my participants. Mark Gilmore, Mr. Mark Gilmore, please go ahead.
Hello, I'm surprised this hasn't been raised. Can you hear me okay? So the executive, the NI executive, obviously, what do we think of this whole fiasco where at the moment we do not know if we're in a circuit breaker, businesses do not know if they're going to open tomorrow or not. What do we make of this whole situation?
Thank you, Mr. Gilmore, for raising that. We'll go to Grant Warren. Thank you very much.
I think just there in the last hour and a half, there was a press release put out by the executive saying that basically the current restrictions will be in place for an additional week, and then there'll be a phased reopening of cafes and restaurants, and then from the 27th, licensed establishments will be able to reopen. But I think the whole way it's been handled has been an absolute shambles, and that it just shows the dysfunction at the heart of the Northern Ireland executive, and the kind of, on one side you have the debate, you want people who want the virus to let rip, and then the other hand you have people who want to have this mad proposal to keep us locked down forever. So I think it's just shows you the dysfunction between the parties.
Thank you for that, Grant. Go to Emily Monroe.
Yeah, I definitely agree that it has been a bit of a mess. The one thing that I don't know whether to call it fascinating or disheartening is that we spent so much time like waiting for Stormont to get its act together and reconvene and like start working together again, only for it to just completely fall apart yet again when it came to making any relatively important decision. So it just goes to show that the way Stormont is currently set up is unsustainable. Even when people's lives are on the line, they cannot get together and decide what should be done. It's just embarrassing for them, to be honest.
Thank you for that, Emily. I'll go to James Orchin.
I'm really surprised, honestly. I'm really surprised that political parties over here would put politics before people's safety. I would never have guessed that would have ever happened. It's truly shocking that that would have occurred. In all seriousness, I mean, is anybody genuinely surprised that the DUP and Sinn Féin would find a way to argue over something or anything, even in the middle of a pandemic? It's just the same as usual.
Thank you for that, James. Olkin McSparren.
Oh, I had a hand on the button. It's not actually up, so yeah.
All right, okay, brilliant. And final word on this, Grant Warren.
Oh, I didn't actually mean to put my hand up there. Sorry.
Brilliant. Okay, so that is the end of private members' business, and now we will move to President's Questions. This is the chance in the evening where you can ask me a question, whether it's about the society or simply what I had for breakfast in this morning. So ask away if anyone has any President's Questions tonight to ask the President of the Society. Raise your hand. Okay. Mr. Matthew Bradley.
I've got it's kind of like a two-part question. So you banged the gavel earlier, and we didn't hear it. So my first question is, looking for the base of the gavel. Do you want it? Do you want the base of the gavel to hit the gavel? It's in Bangor with me because I forgot to put it in the bag to give to you. I'll get that to you when the restrictions have eased up. And secondly, I haven't been here at all this year, so I don't know what the customs are. But I remember last year you asked me some incredibly awkward President's Questions throughout the year. So my question to you, Matt, is what will be the most awkward question I could ask you?
What could be the most awkward question you could ask me?
Yeah.
Well, I think we've moved on from Greg's confectionery, hopefully. We haven't had any of that this year. I don't know. You had some bangers last year. Absolute bangers. I don't know, Matthew. I think only you can answer that question with a question for me. So I think it's your decision to ask you the most uncomfortable question, because I can't think of what you could come up with. You're much more imaginative than me.
I'll ask it next week.
Okay, any further President's questions this week? Nope. Okie dokie. All right then. So we will move to the. Oh no, we have one. Mark Gilmore. Miss Mark Gilmore. Go ahead.
That was accidental. Sorry.
Okay. All right. There you go. So now we will move to the part of the night where we have the vote of prior opinion. So this is where you express your views on the motion. So the motion, this House regrets coronavirus lockdowns. So this is your opinion right now without hearing any speakers make any sort of a speech. So your opinion coming into the debate. So all those who are in favour of the motion, this House regrets coronavirus lockdowns, please raise your hand using the raise your hand function.
I think that's 12.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Could you all lower your hands now, please? And could all those who are against the motion, who wish to vote nay in the motion, please use the raise your hand function now, please.
Looks like that's it.
And could you all lower your hands now, please? And all those who wish to abstain on the motion, so either don't have an opinion on this or know two friends that are arguing either side and don't wish to cause a fuss, raise your hands now, please. And how many is that, Ms. Secretary?
Looks like 5.
Brilliant. Can we have the results of the vote of prior opinion, please, Ms. Secretary?
With 12 votes for the proposition, 8 votes for the opposition, and 5 abstentions, the proposition has it. Looks like we do regret coronavirus lockdowns.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. So this is now the chance for people to change their minds through speakers giving amazing speeches, which I'm sure they will do. But just to quickly recap through the rules, because I know we've had a few speakers that might not have spoken for a while and a few new people that are in the debates tonight. So to recap the rules, we are giving 7-minute speeches. There is 2 minutes of protected time. This is the first minute and the 6th minute. So after the first minute, you will hear, is the bell loud enough? Can everyone hear that? Is that great? And on the 6th minute, you will hear, and they signify the end of the first minute and the beginning of the 6th minute. And after the 7th minute, you will hear repeated ringings of the bell before we eventually just kick you out the call or something. Jay Radcliffe will sort that out, I'm sure. So now it turns to introduce the speaker, our first speaker, our events officer, Mr. Ryan Hoey, to introduce the argument for opposition. So, Mr. Ryan Hoey.
Thank you, Mr. President. Can you all see and hear me okay? Because I'm joining you from Umar's laptop.
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Jolly good. Right, and I'm also reading from my laptop, which is in this corner, so I will be looking away from the camera the whole time, so this is going to be interesting. Anyway, good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be participating in this debate on possibly the most important issue of the entire year. The proposition will be arguing tonight that lockdown is not only economically destructive, but also damaging to the health and well-being of the nation. I would like to start off by correcting the self-righteous narrative of lockdown proponents. Nobody in this debate is arguing from bad faith. The proposition are not some sadistic bastards who want to kill Granny in order to protect the profits of multinational corporations. We want to maximise life and, crucially, quality of life. The alternative to lockdown is not to do nothing, and we do not propose doing nothing. We are in favour of social distancing in public, wearing a mask in crowded indoor spaces, and maintaining good hand hygiene. I was in favour of that even before coronavirus. these minor inconveniences are absolutely worth it if they help to avoid the catastrophe that is lockdown. Let's start off by defining what we mean by lockdown. The proposition defines lockdown as the issuing by the state of stay-at-home orders and the forcible closure of large sections of our economy, including retail and hospitality. We oppose these lockdowns because they are damaging to people's physical health, mental health, and economic health. Firstly, let's talk about. Go ahead, Orla. Orla? It says Orla.
Yeah, it's weird. I have two names. Right, so essentially you're saying it's damaging to physical health, but literally people cannot go to their appointments now because there's no beds left because of coronavirus.
Well, in terms of Northern Ireland, I would put that down to the fact that the healthcare capacity in Northern Ireland has been massively reduced for years now. In fact, we have over 1,000 fewer beds than we did 10 years ago, I think is the statistic. But I will come back to this point because firstly, let's talk about physical health. One of the most damaging consequences of lockdown is the effect it has on other illnesses. The opposition may say that it is possible to carry on treating other illnesses during a lockdown, which is true, but the fear that is instilled by locking down and telling people to stay at home means that even if health services are available, people are more reluctant to take them up. To give just one example, breast cancer now estimates that nearly 1 million women have missed mammograms in the UK during the first lockdown. As a result, nearly 9,000 women are estimated to be living with undiagnosed breast cancer. As anyone who's had a family member with cancer knows, detecting it early is the most important thing we can do to make sure they don't die. And that's just one form of cancer. The Department of Health and Social Care estimates that nearly 1,000 women could be living with undetected cervical cancer as a result of the first lockdown.
On that point,
go ahead.
So you've mentioned about sort of oncology services possibly being put on hold due to the lockdown. I think that in Northern Ireland there's only one central location for cancer treatment, and it's the NI Cancer Centre on the Lisburn Road. But the NI, I think there have mobile oncology units set up around the country to help combat this. So I don't really see your point.
My point is that when you tell people to stay at home, when you lock down the country, people are less likely to come forward to get tested for those things. They're less likely to want to go into hospital if they're scared to the point where they're told not to leave the house. That is the point I'm trying to make. Secondly, I'm going to move on and talk about mental health. I'm sure lots of you shared my experience of general loneliness and depression during those long dark months of lockdown. And the statistics show that we were not alone. The Office for National Statistics released a report in August showing that rates of depression doubled during the lockdown. Rates of depression were the highest in the young, women, disabled, and those struggling to pay the bills. 85% of those surveyed reported feeling anxious or stressed during this period. And the impact of lockdown on our mental health cannot be understated. It is only in recent years that we as a society have started to take mental health seriously, and yet we have implemented a policy that has caused untold damage to the mental well-being of the nation, particularly young people. According to a recent report by the CDC in the States, 25%, a quarter of young people say that they have thought about committing suicide in the last month. Is this really a surprise? Young people have been locked in their uni accommodation, watching lectures on a computer screen, no socialising. Many have lost their jobs and are struggling to get by, all for a virus that poses little risk to themselves personally. Finally, the economic consequences of lockdown. The economic consequences of the first lockdown were catastrophic. Between April and June, the UK economy shrank by 20%. Even with the unprecedented package of support put in place, including the furlough scheme, there will still be millions of people unemployed at the end of this crisis. Go ahead with the point of information.
Pretty much what I'm saying is, yes, the economy is struggling, but isn't it necessary to save lives that can't be brought back? Whereas an economy can be brought back, and many reckon that when the virus is controlled, that the economy will rebound anyway.
No, because the economy is not something that you can just turn off and turn back on again. Even if we could protect every job, which we simply can't, the amount of debt that we have built up will inhibit our ability to pay for public services for years, including the health service. This is why the economy versus lives dichotomy is so misguided. Crashing the economy kills people, unemployment kills people, poverty kills people. According to the government's own figures, the economic impact of lockdown-induced recession and deprivation will lead to between 33 and 35,000 excess deaths in the long term. And because the average person who dies from coronavirus is in their 80s, while the young suffer most of the economic consequences, the number of quality adjusted life years lost due to lockdown will greatly exceed the number of life years saved. And that is from the government's own reports from the Department of Health and Social Care, and yet we are still going ahead with this policy anyway. Now, the second speaker and the third speaker from my side will set out some of the other reasons why lockdown is damaging. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ryan Hoey, for that speech. You did, unfortunately, use a naughty word there. So, as this is your first time, I believe, swearing under my presidency of the Letterific, I will not fine you, but just warn you on this occasion. So now to introduce the first speaker for the opposition, Kira Swale.
I'm not going first.
It's Ollie first.
I'm first. I'm very sorry. I tried to run it by people, and that's what's come out. So the first speaker for the opposition, Oliver Long. Thank you.
No worries. All round. I'm just going to start off with a wee bit of rebuttal there from the previous speaker. We're not suggesting that anyone who decides there should be better versions than lockdown, that we think that you're somehow heartless people. I mean, perhaps there are some amongst you, but we're not saying that you're all like that, so just wanted to make that clear. I just want to put forward the fact that I do not believe lockdowns as a whole should be regretted. I think, first of all, we need to ask ourselves, really, why were lockdowns imposed in the first place? The reason stems all the way back to early March, when I'm sure many of us witnessed those heart-rending scenes in Italy. Hospitals overwhelmed with numerous COVID patients, all on ventilators, fighting for their lives. Within the space of 5 days, deaths would shoot up from 17 to near 1,000. This virus was able to roam free to a certain extent prior to lockdown. And look at the immediate damage that this caused. The proposition talks about the economic effects of poverty and things killing people. Yes, but there's ways of preventing those. There's economic policies you can put in place to try and prevent those. There's secondary effects of economic destruction. COVID kills people directly. Can you imagine what it'd be like if Italy did not if Italy did not lock down sooner? The consequences would be unthinkable. Already the health system was overwhelmed. Any further pressure would see more deaths of people. Doctors and nurses having to deal with COVID patients without essential PPE. They were already running out as it was. Let's talk about our own NHS. Coronavirus has killed more than 600 NHS staff in the UK. Think of how many more would have died if Italy did not lock down. But despite our government witnessing these events play out, we somehow thought we could carry on as normal for another 2 weeks. Must only affect the Italians. Nothing for us to worry about. I regret us not locking down sooner. I think sometimes we forget that this virus is not influenza, thousands of times more severe for those aged over 80. And the proposition says, oh, well, it's 80-year-olds. Oh, so really we should only care about the young people then. Somehow you're dispensable if you reach a certain age. I think, to be fair, that is quite cold. I think sometimes we forget, it's also more dangerous for people with diabetes, etc., and that can be type 1 and type 2. We also have an obesity epidemic in this country, and being overweight is a massive risk factor as well. There's plenty of people with underlying health conditions that they don't even know about and may not even know that they are risks to COVID. Boris Johnson, okay, not the fittest, but fairly healthy considering he has been a keen cyclist, had to be rushed into ICU to receive oxygen, even perhaps having to go onto a ventilator. The point of lockdown was not to stop the virus or get the case rate to zero just to make us feel better or for some arbitrary reason. We are flattening the curve, ensuring the NHS was not overwhelmed. Lockdowns have reduced infection rates, therefore freeing up hospitals to deal with other illnesses, which of course should not be sidelined. However, if this virus was left to roam freely without a lockdown, there would be even less resources to be shared around, compounding deaths from COVID with deaths from cancer, from flu, from heart disease, etc.
On that point?
No, thank you. Also affects ethnic minorities more severely, and if we did not do our utmost to protect them, what does that say about us? Sounds like we care more about certain civil luxuries like going to the pub than protecting people's lives. I'm not saying that's the only civil liberty that we have. It would be the height of selfishness to ask people to shield at home for months, while we recklessly spread a virus amongst the population, ultimately increasing the likelihood of a vulnerable person becoming infected. These shielded people still need to shop for essentials amongst other people, higher chance of the most vulnerable being infected. Many may argue that lockdown is too draconian a measure for our civilized democratic society, but let's look to South Korea, cope with COVID-19, and within 4 days, they'd put in very stringent measures such as tracking your phone. And that's what we need as well. It's not just about a lockdown. It's about ensuring the lockdown's put in place along with a really good control system. I'll take your point.
Yeah, so one of the things that is always cited by proponents of lockdowns is the success that East Asian countries like Taiwan, South Asia, even China, some people cite as examples of the success of track and trace systems, for example. But what people don't realize is South Korea, for example, are using people's, in some cases, possibly even their credit card details to track them. Whereas in Western European countries, there's just a culture of a lot more individualistic behavior. And it's not, in my opinion, an easy or a straightforward comparison to make between countries where there's a lot more social cohesion and interference by the state and Western countries that are more inclined towards freedom.
Well, actually, I think you find that's why I specifically chose South Korea, because it's also a democracy, really values Western values, is much like America, a similar population to ours. So I wasn't just going for China and saying that they're lying about it. That's precisely why I chose that specific example. Herd immunity itself is also a ridiculous assumption to make with a virus about which we knew virtually diddly squat at the time. In fact, now we know there have been people catching the virus and then becoming reinfected. So despite the production of antibodies, it seems immunity gained after catching the virus is not a foregone conclusion. Often proponents of this, including the scientists who signed the Great Barrington Declaration, point to Sweden as an example for the UK to follow. We forget that Sweden has more single-person households, a much more sparsely spread population. You cannot simply copy and paste healthcare policy in that situation, as I would agree with the POI from before, from one country into a different demographic. The opposition may also ask this evening, and they have, about the cost of lockdown. And apparently per day it costs 2.4 billion per day in the UK. Could we not use that money to maybe perhaps bolster the NHS capacity instead of locking down? Unfortunately, you can't magic up doctors and nurses out of thin air. This takes time, even if you had all the money in the world. Despite how bad it gets, and it may be a blunt instrument, economies can recover. People dead from COVID cannot. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Oliver, for that speech. And now we turn to the second speaker for the proposition to continue the argument for the proposition is Caelan McNally. Thank you, Caelan.
Yeah, just again, can everyone hear me and see me okay? Yeah.
That's absolutely brilliant.
Fantastic. Members of the House, I'd like to thank Mr. Speaker for allowing me the floor this evening and congratulate both opening proposition and opening opposition for what have been two very enlightening speeches. I did save myself a sizable chunk of room for rebuttal, But in actuality, the first half of the opposition speech actually agreed and reinforced what I was going to say. We, the proposition, are under no illusions that of the severity of COVID-19, and you only further to reinforce that. And to that end, I thank you. As well, you touched upon minorities and how locking down will adversely affect minorities. I'd like to say the austerity that comes with, like, if we harken back to 2008, the financial crisis, and we find ourselves in another recession, the austerity that comes with that as a negative symptom adversely affects minority groups. It's those in receipt of welfare. It's those who rely on the healthcare system. And so again, further on our point, and finally, you brought up the example of South Korea, which I actually touched upon in my speech as well. You used it as an example to show the effectiveness of lockdown, but then went on to talk about their test and trace system. And I'd like to draw up a distinction.
I actually never said that they locked down. I was talking about draconian measures.
No conversation, please.
Well, no, absolutely. The test and trace system is a fantastic alternative to full-scale lockdown because it allows a country's economy to persist despite implications to try and mitigate the effects of coronavirus. So again, I appreciate you bringing that up in your speech because South Korea is a shining example. I'll defer for a second, Ciara, if you don't mind. But yes, nobody is under any illusions in saying that whatever counteractive measure was implemented, there wouldn't have been some level of disruption, both socially and economically. But it is the job of the proposition tonight to highlight to you that coronavirus lockdowns, as implemented by the UK government, have been undeniably and disproportionately harmful to minority groups and those most vulnerable in our society. I'll take your point now, Ciara.
But the thing is, you're saying like, oh yeah, you know, this track and trace system would be a great alternative, but we don't have it. We still don't have it. We didn't have it during the first lockdown. So what alternative when we didn't have that good track and trace system?
No, Ciara, absolutely. I agree 100%. And the track and trace system as implemented in the UK has been an absolute shambles and insufficient. But just to say that we don't have an alternative isn't to say that the current measure we have in place is sufficient and non-regrettable. But absolutely, I do agree with you in saying that the current track and trace system is a shambles, and we should aspire to something as implemented in South Korea and the model that they used. The argument over lockdown seems to have crystallised into a simple health versus economy debacle. I think Ryan put it quite well in his opening speech. If you position yourself on the left, you value health over money and thus support lockdown, and vice versa for the right. That's the traditional narrative here. But I'm here to say that this need not always be the case. I mean, just take, for example, the proposition as an example. All three members vary in terms of their position on the political spectrum, but here we are tonight united in our belief that the lockdowns must be viewed with regret. Lockdowns as well are disastrous for the world's poor. Despite rhetoric about shared sacrifice, the ability to self-isolate is overwhelmingly correlated to income. White middle-class professionals congratulate themselves for staying inside. Their isolation is dependent on a class of worker who often go without essential equipment or while ill. I'm talking about retail workers and care assistants. Making matters worse, as Oliver touched upon in his speech, many of these workers have underlying health conditions, hypertension, diabetes, that again make COVID-19 so deadly. And that raises the stark reality that in some instances, particularly in America, getting sick is very much a class condition. And research has shown that in America particularly, it is disproportionately poor neighbourhoods that are bearing the brunt of the coronavirus pandemic. I'll defer for a second, of the first 100 victims in Chicago, 70 of them were black. A harrowing statistic. I'll take your point now, thank you.
Yeah, could it not be that there, however, is a legacy of massive governmental failure and not actually the responsibility of the lockdown itself? And to deal with that, they should actually be pumping money into those communities to stop this from being a problem to begin with.
What's this in reference to? Sorry, if we can just get a clarification. Ethnic
Minorities suffering disproportionately during lockdowns and people from economically underprivileged backgrounds.
I mean, the cause, not that it's irrelevant, it definitely is systemic and something that should be addressed, but I'm just saying that lockdown serves to exacerbate this, and thus, again, is something that is regrettable. If we can find a solution that mitigates those problems and doesn't further exacerbate those underlying fundamental issues, systemic as they may be, then surely that's beneficial. We regret aspects of how they handled the Black Death. We regret aspects of how they handled the Spanish flu. In fact, when creating models for handling pandemics, the first port of call for the WHO is to look at responses to past pandemics and look at where we went wrong and where we can improve. So bearing this fact in mind, why would we be so naive in assuming that 100 years from now, our handling of coronavirus, including our lockdowns, would not be deemed barbaric? The sooner that we can accept that our response was not perfect, the sooner we can seek to reform some of these inadequacies through the advancement of scientific methods. The opposition have talked about lockdowns being the only alternative to the current situation and have accused us of offering no alternative to such an argument, that it is a necessary evil. Even if we didn't have alternatives, such an argument wouldn't prevent us from regretting lockdowns, from acknowledging their limitations. When the first plane was invented in 1903, did the Wright brothers simply contest that this was as good as it gets, because there was no alternatives, that this plane was the best plane? Of course they didn't. Sure, there were no alternatives, but that isn't to say that new and more efficient models couldn't be invented. So when saying that the proposition offer a lack of alternatives, the opposition have done little to prove that we should not regret lockdowns. But what if I were to tell you that alternatives already exist? And I touched upon it in my rebuttal to Oliver. The contact tracing system, which is aimed at identifying, isolating and taking care of those who already actually have the disease or are most vulnerable to it, has been implemented already, and it allows us to keep the economy going while doing so. And I believe in South Korea the number is now 2.2 million tests, and we see this correlated to like decreasing infection rates. I've heard the bell, so I'm going to wrap up. Members of the House, to conclude, I'd like to revert back to how I opened. To say that you do not regret lockdowns in light of all of their glaring shortcomings is to overlook the utility that can be garnered from learning from our past mistakes. This is not an argument of left wing versus right wing, but an argument of human betterment. I hope we find better solutions in the future, and I hope we can save more lives. And that hope begins by admitting that we regret the implementation of the current lockdowns. Members of the House, I implore you to propose. Thank you for the floor.
Thank you very much, Caden, for that speech. Is this your first maiden speech to the Literific?
It is not.
Oh, it's not? Okay, well, welcome back. Thank you for...
I had a year abstention there.
Thank you for coming back anyway. We appreciate it. Okay, so now we turn to our second speaker for the opposition. And hopefully this time I have got the right order. Kira Swell, thank you.
Yep, you're correct. So now I'm going to be speaking to you all about why we as a House should oppose the motion of this House regrets lockdowns. So I want to start off by asking, if we didn't lock down, what could we have done? Because at the end of the day, we have to go back to what was happening back then. Because now, in September, they reckon that only 10 to 20 of the percent of the UK's population has gone into contact with the virus. So with only 10 to 20%, we found hospitals overrun. We found people not being able to go to get treatment that they needed because there wasn't any beds left. What could we have done? Because let's be real here. Imagine the catastrophe that would have happened if 30% of the population got it, if 40% of the population got it. Those numbers could have doubled, tripled.
On that point?
Go for it.
Well, I was just going to say the motion tonight is this House regrets, and the word regret implies hindsight. So it's okay to think that at the time it could have been a good idea to go into lockdown, but looking back in hindsight, you can still say that you regret it looking from future events. So this sentiment of just looking to the past is false.
Personally, I would argue against that purely because I still think lockdown was a good idea, because at the end of the day, our NHS was overwhelmed. There were a lot of people who couldn't go forth to actually get their appointments. And essentially, we do have to ask, well, if we didn't have lockdown, what else could we have had? And that would have left to more people getting infected with the virus.
On that point?
No, thank you. Which could have led to our health system would have quite simply collapsed. And there's also a second benefit as to why it would be best to keep the infection rates low, because we don't know anything about this virus yet. We just don't. At this point in time, we don't know what the long-term health effects are, because there are still people to this day that have caught coronavirus that still have long-term health complications for it. And as my comrade said, literally, we don't have a very healthy population. We have one of the worst obesity rates in the UK. We have one of the worst rates of diabetes in the UK. And these people have been shown to have really negative impacts from COVID-19. So the thing is, if we didn't lock down, more people would have been infected, and we can't deny that. So with more people infected, we would have had probably a health system that would have collapsed. No, thank you. We probably would have had a health system that would have collapsed. We would have had more people that probably had really bad long-term health complications from long COVID, which has been shown to be debilitating for people. Some people can't go about their day-to-day lives because they can't breathe. And some people still have fatigue because they can't get on with their day-to-day lives. Because at the end of the day, this idea of, right, okay, let's have all the youth spread COVID about, they won't be affected by this, and we can protect the older generation from shielding them, is frankly nonsense in practice. No, thank you. It's frankly nonsense.
No barking.
Thank you. Which is frankly erroneous in actual real practice. Because, for example, I'm going back to Sweden. Sweden imposed this kind of idea of, let's have the younger generation spread the virus while we shield the older generation. That did not work. COVID still got into those shielding. COVID still got into the care homes because it is a virus that transmits to a ridiculous extent, which has caused one of the highest, probably the highest death rate per capita in comparison to its Nordic neighbours that did actually lock down early. And also, I'm going to go on, go for it.
Yeah, you talk about comparing Sweden to its Nordic neighbours, but actually in Norway, which had a very, very low death rate, they didn't close pubs or restaurants. They had a much less strict lockdown than we had here, and yet got away with far fewer deaths.
Yes, essentially, yes, but they still locked down. Like, that's the basic gist of it. Yes, they didn't have as stricter a lockdown as we had, but they still locked down. And that essentially has saved lives in comparison to Sweden, who essentially still have the highest death rate per capita, and their cases are going up. So this kind of idea of, we can protect people and the immunity will carry on has shown to be false. Because, let's face it, the economy can recover after lockdown. Every single country in the planet has said, right, COVID has hit us hard, but we can recover. And there is a reason why they say we will recover once we control the virus. We can recover once the virus has been gone down. Because at the end of the day, as long as the virus is still here, as long as the virus roams rampant on our streets, the economy can't get back to the normality it once was. And that is the basic gist of it, because people are scared of the virus. The first member of the proposition talked about why people don't go to their appointments. I would argue it's because they had their fear of the virus that's in the hospitals. If they knew the virus was running rampant about the place, there'd be even more people that wouldn't go to the hospitals. And that bleeds into the economy, because at the end of the day, if people are scared to go out, they won't go out. And that means businesses are going to suffer because they're not going to get that revenue going in. So that is my speech, and that is why I think you should vote opposition for the motion, this House regrets the lockdown. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Kira. Sorry, my desktop's gone. Thank you for that great speech. Thank you indeed. And now we turn to the third speaker for the proposition to continue the argument for the proposition, Umar Zian.
Thank you, Mr. President, and welcome back again from Ryan Hoey's room. Unfortunately, and I just say what a pity it is that we can't be together due to this lockdown, which I'm going to speak against. Now, to start off with some debunking, the opposition goes on about high COVID-19 cases. However, they did not touch on at all, is the death rate in proportion to the population, which is absolutely minuscule and focused largely in the elderly and in the vulnerable, who were not protected by the lockdown measures. Taking that into consideration, it makes no sense to lock down the young and the healthy, could have kept the economy going, and the odds of whom dying are exactly the same as Ladbrokes would give you, as I said before, as Ladbrokes would give you for Piers Morgan becoming Prime Minister. The opposition brought up, no thank you, the opposition brought up the Italian situation. But of course they didn't, they overlooked the fact that Italy's health system has been underfunded and under capacity for several years before the lockdown. They furthermore overlooked the fact that Italy did not put in any protective measures of any kind and did not enforce, did not enforce social distancing. As mixing among the Italian public and socializing among the Italian public was rampant before their country eventually plummeted into lockdown. Furthermore, the opposition stated that Sweden can't really be compared to the UK or Northern Ireland because it's far more sparse and has a smaller population. Well, if I may remind the opposition, Sweden does have families and does have many cities with very dense populations which mingle amongst each other very regularly. Furthermore, if I may remind the opposition, the Swedish and Norwegian strategy did create among the lowest death rates in Europe. We in the opposition do not propose inaction and complacency in addressing this pandemic. But what we oppose is harmful and wrong action, the type of action that would result in 9,000 potential women with breast cancer who haven't gotten tested yet out of fear of the virus, which is largely not harmful to most adult women. Ladies and gentlemen, we do support other measures. Quarantining people who arrive into the country, developing an effective test and trace system, as mentioned before, and a well-funded health service, and promoting a healthy lifestyle. All these strategies were utterly neglected by the government when it became clear that the seriousness of this virus became clear. Furthermore, something quite awfully neglected by the opposition is the protection of not just life but the quality of life. Deaths projected by the government, by the government's own department, projected due to deaths due to the recession induced by the lockdown that are projected by the government's own department are between 30 to 35,000 in the next year. No, thank you. This will have a terrible effect on young people, on their opportunity, and indeed have a terrible effect on people who have yet decades, on the livelihoods of people who have decades to live. Furthermore, one point that totally and utterly neglected by the opposition is the point about the deprivation of our liberty. Lord Sumption, who is a former justice of the UK Supreme Court and an eminent historian in the United Kingdom, noted that this has been the greatest seizure of liberty in the UK's history, greater than any restriction imposed in emergencies far worse than this, and in emergencies far worse than this, and even during wartime. Furthermore, the lockdown measures have been according to Lord Sumption, during these lockdown measures, the government has acted with blatant disregard to the limits on their powers and has empowered the police forces to do the same. The lockdown has been very, very expensive, and Parliament's power to curb, Parliament's traditional right to curb the spending by the government has been vastly incapacitated by the bill passed in March, the COVID-19 restrictions bill passed in March. Furthermore, inequality among the richest and the poorest has skyrocketed among the during the lockdown due to these lockdown measures, with the rich vastly expanding their fortunes. Rich top 0.1% people like the likes of Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos have vastly expanded their fortunes, while the savings among the poorest among our society have plummeted. This is an outrageous exchange of wealth from the poorest in our society to the wealthiest. Furthermore, it was mentioned that the mental health cases in the UK have skyrocketed as well, with cases of depression doubling, with 85% of adults in the UK feeling stressed and anxious during lockdown, with over a third of those experiencing depression having problems in their relationships. And if I just may end by mentioning a tweet that I read in the last few weeks that really stands out to me. If you were an alien, tweeted by Daniel Hannon, if anyone's interested. If you were an alien who just landed on this planet Earth and looked at the levels of liberty throughout the world, you'd be forgiven for thinking that the free countries of the world are China and Russia, and you'd think that the authoritarian dystopias are the Western countries, including most of Europe and Great Britain, the foundation of liberty. I'm sorry about it, but it's true. Please support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Umar Ziam, for that speech. And now we turn to the final speaker of the debate and the final speaker for the opposition. Last but not least, Mr. Olcom McSparrow. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Before I get into the main body of my speech, I just want to call out one thing that in particular that Umar said whenever he said that this lockdown has been the greatest infringement on liberty within the UK ever. And I think Mr. Ziam historically is unaware of the British Empire, the penal laws which were enacted in Ireland, the East Indian Trading Company, the exploitation of Africa and the Irish famine. So I think calling this lockdown the greatest infringement on freedom on people who have been within the UK sphere in history is a great disservice to history, and I hope he will take that comment back. Anyway, I would like to move on. We of the opposition are fundamentally for a lockdown that has saved millions of people worldwide. Now look, me, Ollie and Ciara, none of us love the lockdown. None of us want the lockdown to go on forever. That's not what we are saying. However, we realise that it is our duty to keep this lockdown going and to not regret the lockdown that has occurred. This has been something that is necessary.
Point of information?
Yes.
The point that I raised about the deprivation of liberty being among the worst in British history were the words of Lord Sumption, a former justice of the United Kingdom Supreme Court.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that point, and Lord Sumption is wrong. Anyway, It is our duty that we continue this lockdown until we can actually reasonably defeat this virus. And I just want to say a couple of bits of rebuttal. Traditionally in world history, you have the United States of America, you have Russia, you have China, you have the EU, you have these massive different power blocks, and sometimes they agree on things, but very rarely will you get 100% consensus between these powers. Absolutely every single one of these major blocks has implemented a lockdown of one sort or another. The proposition are picking nitpick differences, but overall a lockdown has been implemented between groups that traditionally do not agree on anything. The fact that every country went with a lockdown and said, we have to implement this. This virus is something special. This is a once in a century pandemic, as Boris Johnson is so fond of saying. Does that not highlight to us the seriousness of this and the fact that there was such a general consensus that logic would dictate there must be something in this lockdown, no care. So I think that to try and say that this lockdown is not necessary is really doing disservice to the intelligence of world governments all over. Now, one of the points that was brought
on that point.
No, sorry, Ryan. One of the points that was brought up by Caelan McNally during this was that lockdown has disproportionately affected people of economically underprivileged backgrounds or of ethnic minorities. And I don't doubt what he says. I am sure that there has definitely been a lot of economic hardship for these people. However, is that really the fault of lockdown? Lockdown maybe has exacerbated it, but has it not also highlighted what was already an underlying problem within our society? The lockdown, I'm not going to deny, has not made that better, but it's highlighting something more than the lockdown that we need to sort out. It's not going to be that the day the lockdown ends, all of a sudden all these people are going to be eating champagne and caviar. That's not going to happen. Their economic plight is going to continue. So I think what Caelan has came across here is a very valid point, that there is economic inequality at the minute, but it's not a result of the lockdown. The lockdown simply is showing
information
on that point.
Who was the first one that spoke before Ryan?
Caelan, potentially.
Caelan, I'll take your point, yeah.
Yeah, so you concede that lockdown exacerbated and highlighted and made worse the economic disparity between rich and poor, and yet you say that you don't regret it. And I find it hard to align myself with that line of logic.
Well, it showed an existing problem that already existed with the before the lockdown. It highlighted this point to us. When it comes to the gulf between rich and poor, that's been occurring long before the lockdown, Caelan. You simply can't deny that fact, that it has been getting worse and worse and worse. And if we hadn't have implemented the lockdown, those people in those more economically deprived areas, okay, yes, they wouldn't be poor, they'd be dead. So they would be, because they wouldn't have got the necessary, kept away from the virus the way they needed to be. So the lockdown has saved their lives. Okay, yes, there has been consequences. However, you've kind of got to weigh up your options. Would you rather be poor or dead? And I know which one I would pick any day of the week, no care. Anyway, I want to move on to the main points of my argument. One of the main areas that we've been hearing presently from the proposition is this idea of herd immunity, and that Sweden has implemented herd immunity. And we've heard Sweden mentioned countless times. But one of the points that they are failing to mention is that herd immunity will not be brought in by simply letting everyone get COVID. It's raw science that says it will. If we just let people go about their daily lives, if we just avoid a lockdown, they say more people will get coronavirus, bringing about herd immunity. But when it comes to viruses, take a smallpox vaccine, 90% of people plus had to get vaccinated for smallpox before herd immunity started to kick in. Same with the BCG that was traditionally given. You have to give it to the population as a vaccine before herd immunity kicks in. This idea that we can all wander around and get herd immunity is a non-starter. It doesn't actually work. Herd immunity is this very clever term that's been coined by politicians to say we will implement herd immunity. But what does it actually mean? We give the virus. Coronavirus operates in the same way as a cold. If you get a cold once in October, I've got colds in October and then I've got one again in December. And you can then say, well, the virus isn't as bad the second time you get it. That is true. However, if I go up to my granny and if I cough, 6 weeks down the line, we could have a funeral on our hands. And I quite frankly would rather lock myself in the house for the 6 weeks
to avoid that situation than go up to her house and risk giving her the coronavirus. We've heard a lot of economic arguments given tonight saying that coronavirus will cause economic harm and that long term is going to affect our economy negatively. And COVID has unquestionably resulted in some temporary economic loss. No one is denying that. But what we have seen during the summer was that whenever restrictions were eased, there was a very rapid bounce back. The furlough scheme that came in has managed to support an awful lot of people. There are now serious politicians asking for universal basic income to allow us to support people during this pandemic, things that we could implement. So it's for ideological reasons that we've chosen not to implement a universal basic income. What COVID is doing is it is getting rid of the dead wood in the economy. A lot of very rich people are set to lose an awful lot of money because their office space and because their businesses like the high street are not going to be functioning as well. However, a lot of businesses managed to move that. I'll finish up on this next point here. It's impossible to deny, finally, that lockdown has been effective. Countries which have introduced the most stringent lockdowns are the countries coming out of COVID. South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, countries that we don't often think about in our Eurocentric world. Lockdown can work. They are not pretty. No one likes them. But they cause for normal people's lives to be disrupted. We are not denying that. But I'm asking you this here. If you were in the trenches, and if you were in a situation which was difficult, would you shoot yourself in the foot to get out of it, or would you stay there with your comrades? Lockdown is about duty and is about supporting those in our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Alkin, for that brilliant ending for our debate. Thank you for your speech there. So now we turn to questions. This is a chance for you to ask either the proposition or opposition a question based on their speeches tonight, or maybe just something you thought coming into the debate that they haven't quite answered that you'd quite like to ask. So does anyone have any questions for the proposition? So this is questions directed at the proposition. Michael Kaczynski.
Yes. Firstly, I want to thank everyone for being here tonight. I want to thank everyone for inviting me. This is a very interesting debate. And I want to say that part of the reason, after all, that I'm here over Microsoft Teams is that even if Northern Ireland were not locked down, I, as an American, due to the fact that the United States government has so disastrously mismanaged this coronavirus, we have about, this is according to Johns Hopkins University, 241,798 citizens dead. And per 100,000, we have 73.91 deaths per 100,000 people. As an American, again, I could not be in Northern Ireland to witness this debate, even if I wanted to. I'm not allowed to go to many countries right now because of this. So, given this fact, what should the United States have done differently, if not lockdowns, to stem the spread of the coronavirus?
I'm happy to take this one if the other on my team are okay with that.
So, Neil.
Right. So, Michael, what the United States should have done, or well, it's a bit more complicated over there because of the separation between states and the federal government in terms of the powers that they have, is individual states should have enforced mask mandates. They should have been more stringent on social distancing. They should have ensured that when places reopened, that they had the sort of measures in place that would prevent people from being infected. They should also, particularly some of the biggest areas of deaths in the United States are in places like New York, and the reason for that is because obviously it is a very densely populated area, and also the fact that the governor in New York failed to protect the care homes. And this is the point that the proposition has been trying to make all night, which is that we could have done other things earlier, especially in the UK as well. We didn't have mask mandates until June. We didn't quarantine people coming into the UK before June. All these things we could have done earlier to prevent the lockdown, to prevent the situation where health services could be overwhelmed. And the biggest thing, particularly in the States, was the lack of mask mandates in certain states, and also the lack of protection of care homes from sending people from hospital, COVID positive patients into care homes, which is where the most vulnerable live. So the protection of the vulnerable and also the lack of mask mandates is the biggest thing that the states could have done apart from having lockdowns.
Thank you, Ryan. So the opposition now have a chance to respond. Opposition to respond.
I mean, Ryan, I think, you're kind of being Captain Hindsight there by saying we could have done a better job earlier. Yeah. However, the lockdown it's not a brilliant situation. No one's denying that. But it did result in saving lives. You would have had mass deaths. You could have potentially had a situation where you had body bags literally on the street, and the possibility of undertakers not being able to cope, which was distinctly being talked about in the early days. The lockdown was the immediate, most obvious way out of it. Look, on the opposition here, we're not saying don't take those other measures. We're not saying that we can't look into other avenues. But to say that the lockdown was a bad idea and that continuing lockdowns were necessary is a bad idea is simply lying to yourself about the situation.
Okay, thank you. Questions to the opposition. Does anyone have any questions directed to the opposition? Yep, Grant Warren.
One of the big focuses of the opposition's argument seems to have been on the lockdown in March and trying to justify the first lockdown as automatic justification for the subsequent lockdown. Whereas I think there was a broad consensus of people in March who would have agreed that lockdown was necessary. But going into the lockdown number 2 from last month, it was done on dodgy evidence. And also, how is it possible to justify that it was necessary to go into lockdown when the R rate in the UK had already reached 1 after the government had put different regions of England back into a tier 3 of significant restrictions?
To respond. Yeah. Can we keep responses quite brief though, so we can get another round of questions? And that's okay.
No worries. Essentially, the reason why we had to lock down was that we're over capacity in hospitals. Literally go onto the BBC News every day and they talk about being over 100% in capacity, and that's multiple hospitals across the UK, not just in England. And that's why we need to lock down, because our health system couldn't cope if we didn't lock down, because we don't have the track and trace system that would prevent COVID spread. So because we don't have that, that is something that is from the proposition would be a great alternative. We don't have that. So what else can we do? And the only answer is lockdown.
Thank you for that proposition to now respond.
I'm happy to take this one if that's all right. It isn't true that the reason that we have to lock down is because hospitals are at capacity. It is in some instances, but also the lockdowns aren't actually following the data anymore. The government imposed lockdown in Manchester when the cases were already falling, and also in terms of hospitals being at capacity, it's true that in Northern Ireland, because of how terribly the health service has been run over here for the last few years, even more so than in England, we are reaching capacity. But for example, in Manchester, because the question was about the imposition of tier 3, in Manchester they were operating at 87% capacity. In normal times they operate around 90% capacity anyway, so the capacity was actually there and the cases were already falling, and yet the government was still imposing lockdown because the government isn't following and it's also imposing lockdown across the whole country now, even in places where there are incredibly low cases. So the lockdown is not following the evidence anymore. It's not following the science. And to say that it is doing is to be disingenuous.
Okay, thank you, Ryan. Any abstaining questions? So questions directed at both the proposition and the opposition, or neither directly at all. James Auction.
I suppose I'd just like to ask both sides, what if you're wrong? To the proposition, I mean, what if short-term social enjoyment isn't worth potential human life and human costs? To the opposition, what if Trump was right that, the cure is worse than the disease? So again, what if you're wrong?
We'll go to the proposition to respond to that first.
Can I just quickly jump in on that? It'll be like a one-line response. Just on account of our argument not being predicated on social enjoyment, we were talking predominantly about the economic ramifications and the health ramifications, and nowhere really did we advocate for prioritizing our social enjoyment over health and well-being of others. So I'm just going to disagree with your point there, but thank you for raising it.
Okay, opposition to respond.
Okay, the idea of Trump being right, that's funny. So it is, look, I think when it comes to it, when it comes to the lockdown, the idea of the cure being worse than the disease, if we hadn't have implemented the first lockdown, you would have seen an overrun NHS, and you would have seen multiple health services around the world overrun, which highlights the fact that we have to put more investment into them and also get more doctors and nurses. But when it comes to the second lockdown, people are going, oh, I don't want to go into the second lockdown. Oh, the cases aren't that bad. Why are we implementing it now? Well, anyone who's looked at pandemics through history, like bubonic plague, like the Spanish flu, will tell you that a second wave inevitably happens. So what we're doing this time is we're essentially lancing the boil before the boil becomes a boil. That sentence kind of got away from me, but if you get where I'm coming from there, we're actually stopping the problem before it becomes an issue, and it's not pretty, it's not fun, but it's our duty to do so in order to save the vulnerable in our community. And I would quite frankly say that that is an admirable thing in our society, that we would choose to make that sacrifice to help those people.
Thank you for that, Olkin. Do we have any further questions to the proposition? So last chance to ask a round of questions. Questions to the proposition. No. Any questions to the opposition? Directed to the opposition. Keir Crozier.
Yes, you've said several times that our NHS would have been overwhelmed if we hadn't locked down. But quite simply, on two counts, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that's not true. The first one is that new infections were actually declining before the lockdown on the 23rd of March. The second one is that the Nightingale hospitals that were built were barely even used at all. They were ended up being unnecessary. So I think one of the core points of your argument is simply based on a falsehood.
Opposition to respond first.
Can I, basically, why do you think we didn't need to use them? Because of lockdown. Literally, like, we didn't need to have to use them because we locked down and we didn't see an overwhelmed NHS. Trust me, if we didn't do that, as I said, the population that got infected was 10 to 20%. If 40%, 50% got infected, those deaths and the people infected could have doubled, tripled. Because of that, the NHS definitely would have been overwhelmed, and we would have seen far more deaths than what would have been caused from the recession. Because if we see the number of deaths now being doubled or tripled, well, that exceeds 30,000 deaths from the recession.
Thank you for that. Proposition to respond to that.
I'm happy to take this one if that's all right. The point that Keir raised was absolutely spot on. Voluntary social distancing before the 23rd of March, when we imposed the lockdown, was already leading to a decline in cases. Cases peaked before, because there's a lag in hospitalizations. We know for a fact that cases peaked before the lockdown was imposed. And also the opposition really haven't addressed the point I raised in my original speech about the forecast from the Department of Health and Social Care, which estimate that the lockdown-induced recession and deprivation will lead to more deaths, will lead to over 30,000 deaths in the long term, and also will lead to more life years, quality-adjusted life years, which is how we measure, is how the health service measures the quality and quantity of life that they're saving, will far exceed the number of years saved by lockdown. So yeah, that's basically my answer to the question.
Thank you for that, Ryan. And now finally, the last chance to ask a question if anyone has an abstaining question. Ben Callan.
Thank you. I just want to ask, if both sides. If you were the government, if you were the NI executive, either the 23rd of March or now, last month, what would your response have been to the coronavirus pandemic? What would you have done? And why?
Opposition to respond first.
Right. Okay. So
experiment.
Right. Okay. So in the 23rd of March, I agreed with the lockdown. Actually, I would have brought the lockdown into force a week earlier, in line with what the Irish government did in the Republic of Ireland. I think that would have been a very prudent measure, and it would have brought down the death rate, hopefully, substantially. I believe when it comes to a pandemic, it's one of those things where you should err on the side of caution. So coronavirus can go undetected within a young, healthy person for 3 weeks, and then suddenly they can have it. So whenever we brought in this first circuit breaker of about 4 weeks, I thought that's a good step. However, if you said to me another 2 weeks with the chances that that would save a substantial amount of lives, I would have, and I do want to point out, reluctantly have went along for the next 2 weeks and said, yes, we need to implement it. I know there was a decision made today where they've now came that we're going to do another week of lockdown, and I'm expecting there'll be further negotiations next week in regards to what exactly we are going to do. But I would always say err on the side of caution, because this can kill people, but also provide support for local businesses and for people who are furloughed in all sectors, and ensure that there's the government support in place for them.
Thank you for that, Olkin. Now we go to the proposition to conclude the entire debate with this answer to that question.
I feel like I've been the one answering loads of the questions, but I'll happily take this if that's all right. Olkin's erring on the side of caution makes sense when you think about it in terms of economy versus lives. But as we have already pointed out, and as still hasn't been addressed by the opposition, economy and lives are interconnected. And when you shut down the economy, people die as a result of it. So erring on the side of caution doesn't make sense when both of the actions that you're going to take will have negative consequences in the first place.
Thank you for that, Ryan. So now we go to the vote of speaker ability. Now, this is where you can express which side you believe has given the best speeches and has swayed the debate in their favour. So now, purely based on the speakers, not your views coming into the debate, but the speeches that have been given and in the manners that they have been given, you now vote. So please raise your hand if you wish to vote aye to the motion based on the speeches you've heard tonight. This House regrets coronavirus lockdowns. Please use the raise your hand function.
Looks
Mr.
like 10.
Secretary. Oh, has it changed a little bit?
Oh, yep, 11.
Oh, has it changed again?
12. Oh, no, it's 11 again. I think that's 12. I think we can
Right,
say.
okay, thank you. Please lower your hands now. All those who wish to vote against the motion and believe the opposition gave a more convincing argument, raise your hands and vote nay to the motion. This House regrets coronavirus lockdowns.
Five.
And, 6, I think. Yeah, I think that's 6.
Yeah.
Okay, and all those who wish to abstain on the motion, could you raise your hands if you wish to abstain? Kira, are you abstaining or did you vote? No, you're not abstaining. Okay, brilliant. And that result. Yes, okay. Mr. Secretary, could we have the vote of speaker ability, please?
With 12 votes for the proposition, 6 votes for the opposition, and 5 abstentions, the proposition has it. This House does regret coronavirus lockdowns.
Thank you very much, everybody, for coming to tonight's debate. I just want to let you know about next week's and the week after, which is the Godkin debate. So if you are a fresh speaker at the Society this year, do get involved with that. So next week's debate is this house.
Next week's aren't the Godkin debate.
No, the week after. I said next week and the week after.
Oh, sorry. I thought.
Yeah,
oh, sorry.
No, this house would create designer babies. That's next week. And the week after that is the Godkin newcomers debate. This house would support mandatory vaccination. So if you're interested in those debates, and especially if you're a new speaker to Society this year and wish to participate in the Godkin debate, please message the Society page or Emily Monroe, our internal convener, and we'll sort that out. Yes, Mr. Sullivan.
Oh no, go ahead. I have an announcement after you're done.
Okay, and if you want to get involved with the Lit Talk and the Great Debate, please continue to check our Facebook pages for everything to do with the Literific. So over to Mr. Secretary Matthew Sullivan.
All right, this is a fun bit of housekeeping. So, the SU requires that we hand them a list of all of our members with their student numbers. But when we took sign-ups, guess what we forgot to get? So, if you have signed up for membership, I have sent you an email with a link to a Google Forms asking you for your student number. That is also in the Literiferum. If you're a member, please fill that out so that we can hand a correct record of our membership to the SU. It would be much appreciated. Thank you.
That's absolutely brilliant. Could I now just ask that our council stays behind in this call for a quick chat? And for the rest of you, thank you, good night, and please get involved on all our Facebook groups and our Discord server. The debates do not stop on a Thursday night. Thank you, everybody, and good night.
Thanks, Matt.
Bye.
Bye.
If you're not a Queen's student, I don't need your student number, but still fill out the form to say that you're not a Queen's student, please. You can still be a member if you're not a Queen's student.